The sun had just begun its slow descent behind the rows of maple trees lining Elmwood Drive, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the suburban neighborhood. It was the kind of place that looked straight out of a storybook. Houses painted in muted pastels, driveways spotless, and porches adorned with wind chimes and hanging flower pots swaying gently in the evening breeze. Children's laughter echoed through the streets, mixing with the distant hum of lawnmowers, finishing their last rounds of the day. It was peaceful. It was safe. Or at least, that's what the residents of Elmwood believed. Among them was Emma Thompson, a bright-eyed, curly-haired 3-year-old who possessed a level of curiosity that often left adults astonished. Her small, stubby fingers were always exploring something, clutching a toy, poking at a garden snail, or pointing at some minute detail that no one else had noticed. Emma's parents, Sarah and Mark Thompson, often joked about their daughter's little detective tendencies. "She notices things I wouldn't see if I had 100 eyes," Mark would say, ruffling her curls while she inspected a bug crawling across the patio. This evening, Emma was outside, toddling through the soft grass with a stuffed bunny tucked under her arm. She had been playing a simple game, arranging dandelions in neat little circles on the lawn, when suddenly a loud metallic noise shattered the calm. A neighbor's car alarm had begun blaring from 2 houses down, its shrill scream echoing through the serene street. Sarah, who had been watering the flower beds, froze mid-spray. Mark dropped the gardening hose, his face tightening. "That's Mr. Reynolds' car," he exclaimed, pointing toward the driveway where the family's old sedan sat. They exchanged a quick glance, a shared understanding passing silently between them. Elmwood Drive rarely experienced anything more serious than a lost cat or a missing package. A car alarm was unusual enough to spark concern, but deep down, both of them felt an unspoken dread. Emma, meanwhile, crouched low to the ground, examining the scattered dandelions. The noise barely seemed to faze her. Her big brown eyes, wide and observant, flicked toward the commotion, but she stayed rooted, as if she were trying to piece together a puzzle invisible to everyone else. She didn't cry or call for her parents. Instead, she stood quietly, tilting her head and whispering softly to her bunny. Something wrong. Within minutes, the faint echo of sirens grew louder as 2 police cars turned the corner. The officers arrived with a calm efficiency that belied the tension in the neighborhood. A crowd began to gather on front porches, in driveways, and peeking from behind curtains. Whispers filled the air. Who could have done this? Was anyone hurt? Among the officers was Officer Daniel Green, a veteran of the city's police department, known for his calm demeanor and sharp instincts. At his side was Rex, the department's most reliable K-9 unit. Rex was a sleek German shepherd, trained to detect drugs, explosives, and more importantly tonight, stolen property. The dog's alert posture and pointed ears signaled readiness, a silent reassurance to the onlookers that the authorities were in control. Emma's parents, anxious yet trying to appear composed, called her over. "Emma, honey, stay close," Sarah said gently, lifting her tiny daughter into her arms. Emma wriggled slightly, her eyes still fixed on Rex, as the dog sniffed around the driveway, its nose working methodically across the pavement and the car itself. Something about the precision and focus of Rex fascinated her. She reached out a tiny finger, pointing at him. "Dog," she whispered, almost under her breath. "Look," Mark chuckled softly, brushing it off. "She's just curious," he said. But there was a note of unease in his voice that he couldn't quite shake. Emma's fascination seemed more than mere curiosity. She studied Rex's every movement with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex riddle. The lead officer spoke to the neighbors, asking if anyone had witnessed anything unusual. Several people stepped forward, but none could provide a concrete lead. Elmwood Drive had never experienced a theft, And suddenly, the sense of security that had cocooned the neighborhood was unraveling. Then, the discovery was made. Officer Green approached the car with caution. The doors were unlocked. The ignition was tampered with. It was clear that the vehicle had been stolen, or at least an attempt had been made. The crowd gasped, and a wave of murmurs spread like wildfire. Who would do this? Someone whispered. In this neighborhood? Emma, still perched on her mother's hip, squinted at the scene. Her little brow furrowed as she watched Rex sniff around the perimeter. She tilted her head, as if puzzled by something the dog was missing, or perhaps something the officers were overlooking. Dog, bad, she muttered softly. Almost as an afterthought, Sarah and Mark exchanged a nervous glance. Emma, Sarah whispered. What did you say? Emma repeated the words, pointing insistently at Rex. Dog. Bad. Mark shook his head gently. It's just a kid's imagination, he said aloud, though a part of him felt a chill run down his spine. Officer Green, noticing the child's intense gaze, smiled slightly. Looks like she's taking notes, he remarked to a fellow officer. No one thought much of it at the time, assuming the girl's words were just toddler babble. But Emma's parents felt a strange weight in the air, an intuitive sense that their daughter had seen something critical, something adults might easily miss. Evening grew darker, and the officers continued their investigation. Rex's trained nose worked tirelessly, moving in precise patterns, occasionally signaling interest in certain areas. Emma watched every twitch, every pause, her eyes following the dog's every movement. She didn't blink. She didn't fidget. She observed, silently storing every detail. Hours later, when the neighborhood had mostly returned to its quiet rhythm, a suspect was apprehended a few blocks away. He was described as a local man who kept to himself, someone the neighbors knew, but had never considered capable of criminal behavior. The officers placed him in the patrol car, and the crowd dispersed slowly, whispering about the unlikely events of the evening. Emma, exhausted from her long day of observation, finally yawned and hugged her bunny close. She had said her words, dog. Bad, but the adults hadn't paid them much attention. Still, in her mind, she replayed the sequence over and over, noting the way Rex had paused at the wrong spot, the way the man had fumbled nervously when approached. Even at 3 years old, her mind worked like a puzzle, connecting dots no one else noticed. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Emma didn't realize that her small words, her keen observation, and her quiet courage would soon play a pivotal role in a courtroom drama that would leave the entire town, eventually the nation in awe. Little did the residents of Elmwood Drive know, their peaceful street was about to witness an extraordinary story. One where innocence, curiosity, and a tiny child's insight would intersect with law, justice, and a police dog in a way no one could have imagined. And at the center of it all, Emma would prove that sometimes the smallest voices carry the loudest truths. By the next morning, Elmwood Drive was buzzing with quiet tension. The theft from Mr. Reynolds' driveway was the talk of the neighborhood. While most residents shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered theories and speculated on the identity of the thief. Emma's parents, Sarah and Mark, felt a growing unease. They had tried to brush off their daughter's words, dog, bad, as the imaginings of a 3-year-old. But deep down, a nagging instinct told them something wasn't right. The police had worked through the night, reviewing surveillance footage from nearby homes and checking vehicle registrations. The footage was grainy, but it seemed to show a man lingering near the driveway, glancing over his shoulder as if wary of being seen. He was a local resident, someone who lived just a few blocks away, a man known for keeping to himself, largely unnoticed by the neighborhood. At precisely 9 a.m., a squad car pulled up in front of the suspect's modest brick house. The officers, including Officer Daniel Green and Rex, exited the vehicle with practiced precision. The man, startled, stepped out of his home. His hands were shaking slightly, and his eyes darted nervously between the squad car and his front porch. The police asked him to raise his hands and approach. He complied, a mixture of confusion and fear on his face. Emma, now seated on the porch with her mother, watched silently. Her brow furrowed as she observed Rex, who walked slowly beside the officers, sniffing the air with remarkable focus. She didn't speak at first, but her small hand twitched as though wanting to point. Finally, she uttered, "Dog." "Bad," again, a quiet but pointed warning. Sarah and Mark exchanged a glance. "She's just repeating herself," Sarah murmured, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's face. But Mark's expression was more conflicted. He couldn't shake the feeling that his daughter had noticed something crucial. Even the way she pointed at Rex and studied the man's movements suggested a level of observation that went beyond normal toddler curiosity. Despite Emma's warning, the man was formally arrested. He was taken into custody without incident, and the officers transported him to the station for questioning. The neighborhood watched silently as the patrol car drove away, whispers and sideways glances spreading through the crowd. Many residents nodded at the police, assuming the matter was resolved. But Emma remained unusually pensive, hugging her stuffed bunny and staring after the car as though she were witnessing a mistake that no one else could see. Over the next few hours, Emma's parents began to notice subtle signs that something was wrong. She refused to play with her toys, instead moving quietly from window to window, observing the street outside. When Sarah asked her to come eat breakfast, she shook her head and whispered again, "Dog." "Bad." Sarah and Mark exchanged concerned glances, wondering if their daughter's sharp instincts were trying to tell them more than they realized. At the police station, the man faced intense questioning. He maintained his innocence, explaining that he had been walking home from the corner store when he had seen someone tampering with the car. He had approached to investigate and had been mistakenly identified as the thief. The officers, relying heavily on Rex's indications and the shaky surveillance footage, were initially skeptical. But his demeanor, a combination of fear, confusion, and frustration, raised questions that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, back at Elmwood Drive, Emma's insistence on Rex's behavior became more pronounced. She mimicked the dog's movements with her tiny hands, pointing at areas around the driveway and the sidewalk where Rex had paused. She even gestured toward the man's route, as if illustrating that the dog had misled the officers by focusing on the wrong scent trail. Sarah and Mark began to wonder if their daughter's unusual attention to detail might actually hold some truth, though it was difficult to imagine how a 3-year-old could influence an official investigation. By afternoon, the story began attracting attention beyond the neighborhood. Local media outlets arrived to cover the arrest of the so-called car thief. Reporters gathered on lawns, cameras rolling as neighbors gave interviews, each claiming to have seen the man acting suspiciously. Yet, despite the media frenzy, a subtle tension lingered. Something felt off to those paying close attention. And Emma, in her quiet, observant way, seemed to sense it too. That evening, Sarah and Mark reflected on the day's events. They sat in the dim glow of their living room, Emma asleep in her small bed upstairs. "Do you think we should have said something?" Sarah asked softly. Mark hesitated. "It's hard to say, but I can't shake the feeling that she saw something we didn't. I've never seen her focus like that before. Something about the dog." She knew. The next day brought a twist that no one had expected. While reviewing the police's initial reports and footage, one officer noticed inconsistencies in Rex's indications. The dog, though trained and experienced, had paused in places that didn't align with the stolen car's location. Subtle environmental cues, wind direction, nearby scents, and movement of other animals could have influenced Rex's tracking. It was a minor detail, But in law enforcement, even small inconsistencies mattered. Emma's parents returned to the station, feeling compelled to explain their daughter's observations. Sarah gently approached Officer Green and described Emma's repeated warnings. "She kept pointing at Rex," Sarah explained. "She said, 'Dog.' Bad. I know she's just a child, but something about the way she was watching him, it felt important." Officer Green, though skeptical, listened carefully. Experienced as he was, he knew that sometimes, even the smallest details could alter an investigation. By mid-afternoon, a new review of the surveillance footage began. Analysts compared the timeline of events with Rex's movement patterns, noting discrepancies in scent identification. The officers realized that the dog's focus had shifted at key moments, possibly leading to the wrongful identification of the man in custody. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to warrant further investigation. Meanwhile, the man who had been arrested remained in custody, increasingly frustrated and confused. "I didn't do anything," he insisted to the officers. "I was just walking home. You have to look at the other possibilities." His voice was steady, but edged with desperation. Officer Green nodded thoughtfully, considering the possibility that their initial assumption might have been flawed. The thought that a child's casual observation could actually highlight a serious mistake began to take root. Back at home, Emma, unaware of the adult concerns swirling around her words, continued her quiet observations. She inspected her toys with the same intensity, rearranging them and pointing toward imaginary lines that mirrored the path Rex had taken. To her, it was a game, but to anyone watching closely, it resembled the analysis of a seasoned investigator. As evening fell, the neighborhood felt a shift in atmosphere. The initial relief that a suspect had been arrested was replaced by uncertainty. People spoke in hushed tones, glancing at each other, wondering if perhaps the situation was more complicated than it seemed. And at the center of it all, a tiny child's intuition, the simple phrase, "dog." Bad loomed quietly, poised to reveal a truth that no one had yet fully understood. Emma's parents tucked her in that night, still pondering the implications. "She might be onto something," Mark whispered to Sarah. "I don't know how, but she noticed what we didn't. And maybe she could help us understand the truth before it's too late." Sarah nodded, a mixture of concern and pride washing over her. In that moment, both of them realized that Emma's innocence and sharp observation were not just charming quirks. They might be the key to preventing an injustice. Little did the residents of Elmwood Drive know, the arrest of the quiet neighbor was only the beginning. The coming days would pull them into a courtroom drama where truth, instinct, and the unexpected wisdom of a 3-year-old would collide. Emma's 2 simple words, repeated and insistent, had already planted a seed that would grow into a revelation so astounding it would leave the entire community and eventually the nation in awe. The courthouse was buzzing with activity the morning of the trial. Reporters with cameras and microphones crowded the steps, their voices overlapping as they shouted questions at anyone willing to answer. Television crews set up bulky equipment, ready to capture every detail of what had already become a local sensation. The arrest of a quiet neighborhood man for a car theft he insisted he hadn't committed. Spectators crowded the benches inside the courtroom, their whispers echoing off the high ceilings. Among them, Sarah and Mark Thompson clutched each other's hands. With Emma perched on Mark's lap, her eyes wide with curiosity, the Thompson family had debated whether to bring Emma. At just 3 years old, she was far younger than any typical witness. Yet they felt compelled to include her in the proceedings, even if only as observers. Emma, seated quietly in her father's arms, seemed calm and observant, her brown eyes scanning the room like a tiny detective. She didn't fidget or whimper. Instead, she followed every movement with the intense focus that had already alerted her parents to her remarkable observational skills. The judge, A stern yet fair woman with a reputation for impartiality called the court to order. The air in the room thickened as the trial began. The prosecution presented its case first. They emphasized the thoroughness of the police investigation, the reliability of Rex, the K-9 unit, and the evidence gathered from the crime scene and nearby surveillance cameras. The crowd listened attentively, occasionally murmuring among themselves when certain details were emphasized. Officer Daniel Green took the stand to testify, describing the police procedures used to identify the suspect and the role Rex had played in the investigation. He explained the dog's training, highlighting Rex's high success rate in detecting stolen property and identifying potential suspects. Rex is highly reliable, Green said, gesturing toward the German Shepherd sitting quietly at the officer's side. He has never been wrong in a case like this. The defense attorney, a sharp-minded woman named Clara Benson, rose with calm confidence. Her eyes swept the courtroom as she addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "the prosecution's case appears straightforward at first glance, but upon closer inspection, inconsistencies emerge. We must consider the possibility that errors were made, even by trained professionals. And sometimes, the truth comes from the most unexpected sources." Clara pointed to Rex, whose ears perked up at the sound of his name. She explained that environmental factors, distractions, and even the presence of multiple scents could interfere with a dog's tracking ability. She emphasized that while Rex was skilled, no system human or canine was infallible. The courtroom shifted in its attention, intrigued by the possibility that the seemingly foolproof evidence might not be as concrete as presented. Meanwhile, Emma's tiny fingers twitched on Mark's lap. She leaned slightly forward, her gaze fixed on Rex as he sat obediently at the officer's side. She whispered softly, almost inaudibly, "Wrong dog." Sarah froze, heart pounding. She turned to Mark, whispering, "Did she just say that?" Mark nodded slowly, equally stunned. Emma repeated the words, this time louder, pointing at Rex with her small hand. "Wrong dog," she said clearly, her tone insistent. A hush fell over the courtroom as observers turned their attention toward the child. The judge raised an eyebrow, glancing at Emma with curiosity. Clara Benson, quick to seize the moment, addressed the court. "Your Honor," she said gently, "if it pleases the court, I would like to allow this young witness to demonstrate something important." She approached Emma with a kind smile, kneeling to her level. "Emma, can you show us what you mean?" Emma stood on her tiny legs, holding her bunny tightly, and began to gesture toward Rex. She mimicked the dog's sniffing motions and pauses, pointing toward areas near the driveway that he had investigated during the initial incident. Though she spoke in simple words, her actions clearly indicated that Rex had paused at the wrong locations, potentially leading the officers to misidentify the suspect. The courtroom watched in stunned silence. The judge, skeptical but intrigued, asked the officers and legal teams to pay close attention. Experts in animal behavior and police procedure were called in to interpret Emma's gestures. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Rex had indeed been distracted during key moments of the investigation, influenced by environmental scents and the movement of other animals in the vicinity. The seemingly small errors had contributed to the wrongful arrest of an innocent man. The defense attorney emphasized this point to the jury. This child, with nothing more than her observation and innocence, has highlighted a critical flaw in the prosecution's case. The evidence, while compelling at first glance, is not infallible. We must question the reliability of what we assume to be perfect. Clara paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the courtroom. The spectators exchanged glances, murmurs growing louder as the implications became clear. Even Officer Green found himself reconsidering the events. He had trusted Rex's abilities implicitly, yet the child's observations, combined with the environmental review, introduced doubt. The officers were trained professionals, but the courtroom now acknowledged that even expertise had limitations. Emma's seemingly simple words, "wrong dog," were shining a spotlight on a critical oversight that could have resulted in a miscarriage of justice. The prosecution struggled to respond. They attempted to downplay the child's gestures, arguing that Emma's actions were coincidental and that Rex's overall reliability remained high. But the jury's attention was captured. The innocence of the child, her clarity of observation, and the seeming precision of her gestures created a tension that no adult testimony could easily dismiss. Throughout the day, Emma remained remarkably composed. She shifted occasionally, adjusting her grip on her bunny, but her eyes never left Rex. Each pause, each subtle movement she mimicked, illustrated her understanding of the situation. Observers whispered among themselves, amazed that a 3-year-old could convey so much with so little. For many, it was both fascinating and unsettling to realize that a child might perceive truths that trained adults could overlook. By mid-afternoon, the courtroom had shifted from routine legal procedure to a spectacle of observation versus expertise. Experts on canine behavior testified about potential distractions during Rex's tracking, while Emma's gestures provided a concrete, visual reference. The defense painted a picture of a flawed process, subtly guided by the insights of a child whose innocence allowed her to see what others had missed. The tension was palpable as the judge called for a brief recess. Journalists crowded the hallway outside, speculating about the unusual testimony. Legal professionals whispered in corners, debating the implications of a toddler's involvement in a criminal case. Emma's parents hovered nearby, quietly proud yet anxious. They had never imagined that their daughter's simple observations could hold such significance. As the courtroom reconvened, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Everyone knew the case had changed. The focus was no longer solely on the evidence collected by law enforcement. It now included the remarkable perspective of a tiny, observant child. Emma, in her innocence, had introduced doubt and highlighted the need for careful scrutiny of every detail. By the end of the day, it was clear that the trial had taken an unexpected turn. The prosecution's straightforward case had been complicated by the combination of human oversight, environmental factors, and the unanticipated clarity of a child's observations. Emma had done more than capture attention. She had begun to reshape the course of the trial. For Sarah and Mark, watching their daughter, a mixture of pride and awe filled their hearts. They had known Emma was perceptive, but they hadn't realized her observations could influence the fate of a man's freedom. As they left the courthouse, the murmurs of the crowd followed them, each whisper acknowledging the extraordinary role that innocence and attention to detail could play in the pursuit of justice. The stage was set for the next phase of the trial. The courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary. A child's voice and gestures, simple yet precise, challenging the assumptions of even the most trained professionals. And though the outcome was still uncertain, one thing was clear: Emma Thompson had become an unexpected hero, a tiny force of truth in a complex world of law, procedure, and human error. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that made even the smallest sound seem deafening. Emma Thompson, perched on her father's lap, suddenly straightened and pointed at Rex, the police dog, with an intensity that froze everyone in place. "Wrong dog," she said, her tiny voice carrying clearly across the hushed room. The words were so simple, yet the courtroom collectively felt the weight of their significance. Sarah and Mark exchanged alarmed glances. Emma's statements, once dismissed as toddler babble, now seemed deliberate and pointed. The parents realized she wasn't just talking. She was trying to communicate a crucial observation, one that adults had entirely overlooked. Judge Morrison, known for her patience and fair-mindedness, raised an eyebrow, glancing at the little girl. "Did you just say that, young lady?" she asked gently. Emma nodded, her brown eyes serious and focused. She looked at her mother briefly, then back at Rex, as if signaling that the dog had misled the authorities. Clara Benson, the defense attorney, immediately recognized the opportunity. She stepped forward with a calm, confident demeanor, addressing the court. "Your Honor," she said, "I would like to allow this young witness to demonstrate something important. Though she is only 3 years old, her observations could shed light on critical details that have been overlooked." The courtroom murmured, skeptical yet intrigued. Could a child so young genuinely contribute to a criminal investigation? The notion seemed absurd, but there was a sense of curiosity and awe in the air. Spectators leaned forward, cameras focused on the small figure of Emma as she prepared to demonstrate her insight. Clara knelt to Emma's level, offering her a gentle smile. "Emma," she said softly, "can you show us what you mean by wrong dog?" Emma's tiny fingers clutched her stuffed bunny, but her other hand rose, pointing insistently at Rex. She began to mimic the dog's actions, tracing its sniffing patterns along the floor in miniature gestures. She paused where Rex had hesitated and gestured toward areas the dog had overlooked during the initial investigation. The room fell completely silent. Observers could see the pattern emerging through Emma's small, deliberate movements. The child's gestures highlighted discrepancies in the dog's, tracking places where Rex had paused unnecessarily or been distracted by external factors. It became clear, even to the most skeptical in the courtroom, that the canine's indications were not as infallible as previously assumed. Officer Green, standing near Rex, watched with a mixture of surprise and concern. He had trusted Rex implicitly, relying on the dog's training and years of proven reliability. Yet, Emma's simple demonstration illustrated that errors had occurred, errors that could explain why the wrong man had been arrested. Even trained professionals could be misled under certain circumstances. The judge leaned forward, her interest piqued. "I have never seen a witness so young offer such clarity," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Clara, sensing the gravity of the moment, addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, innocence and observation are often underestimated. This child, with nothing more than her attention to detail, has revealed a flaw in the process that adults overlooked. Her actions deserve careful consideration." Emma repeated her demonstration several times, pointing at key spots with precision. Each gesture reinforced the idea that Rex's tracking had been compromised. The child's understanding of the sequence of events, her ability to notice subtleties in the dog's behavior, was uncanny. It was as though her small frame contained a mind capable of analyzing patterns far beyond what one would expect from a toddler. The prosecution struggled to respond. They attempted to dismiss Emma's gestures as coincidental, arguing that her observations were random and had no bearing on the investigation. But the jury, captivated by the unusual turn of events, seemed unconvinced. The combination of the child's innocence and the specificity of her gestures created a powerful impression. Perhaps the police, despite their expertise, had relied too heavily on Rex's indications without considering possible errors. Experts in animal behavior were called to interpret Emma's actions. They explained that even highly trained dogs could be influenced by environmental factors. A gust of wind carrying a distracting scent, the movement of other animals, or residual odors from past events. These subtle influences could misdirect a dog, even one as skilled as Rex. Emma's gestures, highlighting exactly where Rex had paused or been distracted, provided a rare visual confirmation of what the experts described. As the courtroom followed the demonstration, the wrongly accused man shifted nervously in his seat. For the first time, there was a glimmer of hope that his protests of innocence might be validated. His eyes met Emma's briefly, and though she didn't speak, her unwavering focus seemed to communicate a silent reassurance. She had noticed the truth, and it was about to emerge. Outside the courtroom, reporters whispered excitedly. The story of a toddler influencing a criminal trial was unprecedented, and the media sense of awe was palpable. Cameras captured every movement, every small gesture, emphasizing the surreal nature of the situation. Emma's 2 words, so simple and yet so impactful, were now at the center of a developing national narrative. The judge, sensing the importance of clarity, requested that the officers and the jury pay close attention to the child's demonstration. Each pause, each pointing gesture, revealed subtle inconsistencies in Rex's tracking. The courtroom began to grasp the potential gravity of the situation. The arrest that had seemed straightforward might now be revealed as a mistake, illuminated by a 3-year-old's insight. Even seasoned officers, accustomed to relying on decades of training and experience, nodded in acknowledgement. They realized that Emma's observation highlighted a limitation in their process, one that could have serious consequences if ignored. The combination of innocence, intuition, and meticulous observation had forced a re-evaluation of the evidence. As the day progressed, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The prosecution's confidence waned, replaced by a cautious re-evaluation of the case. The jury, attentive and increasingly aware of the significance of Emma's gestures, whispered among themselves during recess. Outside observers speculated on the impact of a child's testimony in a legal system designed for adults. Sarah and Mark, watching their daughter, were both amazed and anxious. Emma had always been observant, but the sheer precision of her actions in such a high-pressure environment was extraordinary. They realized that her simple words, "wrong dog," were more than a comment. They were a key to understanding what had gone wrong, a guiding clue that could prevent a miscarriage of justice. By late afternoon, the demonstration concluded. Emma returned to her seat quietly, hugging her bunny, as if her work for the day was complete. The courtroom remained tense, filled with a mixture of disbelief, admiration, and anticipation. Everyone understood that the trial had shifted in an unexpected and remarkable way, hinging on the observations of a tiny, seemingly powerless child. Judge Morrison, preparing to adjourn for the day, addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said carefully, "we have witnessed something unusual today. While this courtroom has seen many forms of testimony, it is rare indeed to observe a witness whose perspective so profoundly challenges our assumptions. Consider carefully the observations presented, for they may illuminate truths previously overlooked." The media coverage exploded overnight. Headlines highlighted the astonishing contribution of a 3-year-old. Toddler points out mistake in police investigation, and child witness challenges courtroom evidence. Emma became a symbol of innocence and insight, her 2 words, "wrong dog," echoing across the nation. And as night fell on Elmwood Drive, the neighborhood that had once felt so secure now buzzed with the thrill of the extraordinary. A tiny child had done what adults had overlooked. She had noticed a critical flaw, spoken the words that drew attention to it, and demonstrated a clarity that left even seasoned professionals in awe. In that quiet moment, Sarah and Mark tucked Emma into bed, kissing her forehead. "You were very brave today," Sarah whispered. Emma yawned and hugged her bunny, unaware of the magnitude of her actions. But her parents knew. Their daughter's words had set in motion a chain of events that would change the course of the trial, and perhaps redefine how observation and truth are recognized in the most unexpected ways. The stage was set for the next phase. The investigation would be revisited, the evidence re-examined, and the consequences of Emma's observation would ripple through the courtroom, ultimately leading to revelations no one could have anticipated. The 2 simple words of a 3-year-old had created a turning point, one that promised to challenge assumptions, reveal truth, and alter the fate of an innocent man. The following morning, the courtroom was abuzz with whispers. Everyone could feel that the trial had shifted overnight. What began as a straightforward case of a stolen car had now become a far more complex affair. Emma Thompson, a 3-year-old, had demonstrated a perspective that no one in the courtroom had considered, pointing out that Rex, the highly trained police dog, might have misled the authorities. The media coverage from the previous day only added to the tension, portraying the toddler as an unlikely hero. Judge Morrison called the court to order, her gaze sweeping over the spectators and attorneys alike. "Given the events of yesterday," she began, her voice steady yet commanding, "it is clear that additional review of the evidence is warranted. The jury will be instructed to consider all testimony carefully, including the observations demonstrated by the young witness." The room fell silent, as if absorbing the weight of her words. Clara Benson, the defense attorney, stood confidently. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the court, "we request a thorough re-examination of Rex's tracking during the initial investigation, including environmental conditions, scent interference, and other factors that may have influenced his indications. We believe this review will demonstrate that the arrest of my client was based on flawed assumptions, and that the observations made by the witness are critical to uncovering the truth." Green and the other law enforcement officials exchanged uneasy glances. Rex had never failed them in the past, yet the child's demonstration could not be ignored. The officers agreed to comply with the court's order, though privately they wrestled with disbelief. Could the intuition and simple observation of a toddler really reveal a flaw in a highly trained investigative system? Within hours, a team of specialists in canine behavior, forensic analysis, and environmental factors was assembled. The goal was to meticulously review every detail of the initial investigation. They analyzed Rex's scent tracking path, cross-referencing it with environmental data such as wind direction, humidity, and the presence of other animals. It became apparent that the dog had been subtly misdirected. A neighbor's dog had walked near the crime scene earlier in the day, leaving a confusing trail of scents. Additionally, the wind had carried other odors that Rex's acute nose had mistakenly prioritized. Clara Benson presented this information to the jury, demonstrating with diagrams and footage how Rex's tracking had been influenced by external factors. "Even the most skilled and reliable professional," she explained, "is not immune to error. Rex is extraordinary, but he is not infallible." These factors, when combined with human reliance on the dog's indications, created a situation where an innocent man was arrested. Throughout this process, Emma's contribution remained central. Courtroom observers watched in awe as the tiny girl repeated her gestures, pointing to key areas on the floor where Rex had paused or shifted his focus. Each motion provided clarity that expert testimony alone could not fully convey. The innocence and simplicity of her actions cut through the complexity of the technical analysis, illustrating the discrepancies in a way that everyone could understand. Officer Green, now reviewing the revised tracking analysis, found himself nodding in acknowledgement. He had spent years relying on Rex's abilities, yet the evidence was clear. The dog had been influenced by environmental factors beyond the officer's control. The combination of Emma's gestures and the forensic review revealed a critical truth. The man who had been arrested was likely innocent, and the investigation had taken a wrong turn. The wrongly accused man, still in custody, began to regain hope. For the first time, he felt that the truth might finally emerge. He glanced at Emma, seated quietly with her bunny in hand, and could hardly comprehend that a child so young had been instrumental in uncovering evidence that adults had overlooked. It was a moment of human connection, small yet profound, that underscored the unpredictable ways in which justice could unfold. Outside the courtroom, the press coverage intensified. Headlines proclaimed, "Toddler highlights critical, flaw in police investigation and child witness forces, re-evaluation of arrest." Social media buzzed with comments expressing amazement at the unlikely role of a 3-year-old in such a serious legal matter. Public interest skyrocketed, drawing attention to the interplay between innocence, observation, and the pursuit of truth. The defense team continued its meticulous work, reviewing Rex's entire training history, environmental logs, and all sensory data collected during the initial investigation. Each piece of evidence, when re-examined, reinforced the conclusion that errors had occurred. The combination of environmental influence, human oversight, and canine misdirection formed a compelling argument for reasonable doubt. The jury's perspective was shifting, influenced not only by the technical evidence, but also by the remarkable clarity of a child's demonstration. Judge Morrison, keenly aware of the unusual nature of the proceedings, addressed the courtroom. "We are witnessing an extraordinary situation," she said. "A combination of expert analysis and simple observation has revealed discrepancies in the initial investigation. It is imperative that we examine all evidence thoroughly and ensure that justice is served. The observations provided by the young witness, though unconventional, are being treated with the utmost seriousness." By late afternoon, the re-examination produced a startling revelation. Rex had indeed paused at locations inconsistent with the actual path of the suspect. These pauses, influenced by subtle environmental factors, had inadvertently led the officers to focus on the wrong individual. The combination of a toddler's keen observation and detailed forensic review made it undeniable. The man arrested for the theft was innocent. The courtroom was filled with a mixture of relief, astonishment, and anticipation. The jury, now fully aware of the significance of Emma's observation, whispered among themselves, their expressions a blend of disbelief and admiration. Legal experts recognized the unprecedented nature of the case. A child's intuition had become a pivotal factor in a formal criminal proceeding. Sarah and Mark watched their daughter with a profound mixture of pride and awe. They had long known Emma was perceptive, but even they were unprepared for the impact of her insight. Her words "wrong dog" and her precise gestures had initiated a domino effect, ultimately leading to a re-evaluation of evidence and the potential exoneration of an innocent man. The prosecution, now facing mounting evidence that contradicted its initial assumptions, struggled to maintain its position. They acknowledged the environmental factors influencing Rex's tracking and conceded that the initial arrest may have been based on incomplete analysis. The courtroom atmosphere shifted, balancing between tension and the anticipation of justice finally prevailing. Emma, for her part, remained serene. She clutched her bunny, her eyes occasionally flicking toward Rex, as if silently confirming that her observations had been understood. The room seemed to recognize her quiet authority, the way innocence could illuminate truth in ways adults often overlooked. She had become the unlikely yet undeniable pivot upon which the case now turned. By evening, Judge Morrison concluded the day's proceedings with a reflective tone. "This courtroom has witnessed a remarkable intersection of innocence, observation, and expertise," she said. "The evidence has been re-examined, and the importance of all perspectives, no matter how unexpected, has been recognized. Tomorrow, we will continue with the proceedings, taking into account these revelations, and move closer to a resolution that reflects the truth." As the courtroom emptied, the media swarmed outside, eager to capture statements from the Thompson family and the legal teams. Sarah and Mark gently lifted Emma, who yawned and hugged her bunny, unaware of the historical significance of her contribution. Yet the family understood that their daughter had done something extraordinary. She had bridged the gap between innocence and justice, providing clarity that adults alone could not achieve. That night, Elmwood Drive seemed quieter, yet charged with the excitement of impending revelation. Residents whispered to one another, sharing news of the day's developments and marveling at the idea that a small child could influence a serious criminal trial. In homes across the neighborhood, parents tucked their children in with a sense of wonder, inspired by the story unfolding so close to home. And at the center of it all, Emma slept peacefully, her small hand clutching the bunny that had been her companion throughout the extraordinary day. Little did anyone know that her two words, Wrong Dog would continue to shape the trial in ways no one could have predicted, paving the way for justice, truth, and a mind-blowing conclusion that would leave the nation in awe. The following morning, the atmosphere in Elmwood Drive was electric. The trial had captured the attention of the entire town, and news crews were camped outside the courthouse, eager to capture every moment of the unfolding drama. The community was abuzz with speculation. Who was the real thief, and how had a 3-year-old girl uncovered a critical flaw in the investigation? Emma Thompson, seemingly oblivious to the attention, clutched her bunny tightly and followed her parents into the courthouse, her brown eyes scanning the scene with quiet focus. Judge Morrison called the court to order, her presence commanding silence. "We will proceed with additional investigation findings today," she announced, her voice steady. "The evidence re-examined yesterday has revealed discrepancies in the original case, and further inquiry has identified new leads." The room shifted in anticipation, journalists raising their cameras, spectators leaning forward, and the jury exchanging intrigued glances. Clara Benson, the defense attorney, stood poised before the court. "Your Honor," she said, "as a result of the detailed review of Rex's tracking and the environmental factors highlighted by the young witness, law enforcement conducted further inquiries in the neighborhood. These inquiries have identified the true culprit, whose actions were previously obscured by misleading evidence." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Officer Green nodded in confirmation. "Yes, ma'am," he stated, his tone a mixture of professionalism and subtle relief. The additional investigation, prompted by careful reanalysis and corroborated by the witness's observations, has uncovered the individual responsible for the attempted theft. This person had been operating under the cover of darkness and had inadvertently left misleading scents that affected Rex's tracking. The crowd erupted into murmurs, and the wrongly accused man's expression shifted from anxiety to cautious hope. He met Emma's eyes briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between the adult and the child who had unwittingly saved him from injustice. It was a small but profound moment, highlighting the extraordinary impact of a tiny, perceptive observer. Clara Benson requested that the real culprit be brought into the courtroom. Moments later, the police escorted a young man in his early 20s to the stand. He appeared nervous, his eyes darting around the room. He admitted to attempting the car theft, explaining that he had been desperate and acting without full consideration of the consequences. The confession was straightforward, yet the tension in the courtroom remained palpable. The prosecution, faced with this development, acknowledged the validity of the new evidence. They conceded that their initial reliance on Rex's tracking, while logical, had been flawed due to unforeseen environmental influences. The courtroom collectively recognized the remarkable sequence of events. A toddler's observation had indirectly led to the identification of the true culprit, correcting a grave error in the justice system. Emma, perched on her father's lap, remained calm. She watched the real thief closely, her small fingers gripping her bunny, as if understanding, in her own childlike way, that justice was being restored. She repeated her earlier gestures quietly, pointing to areas of the courtroom floor that mirrored Rex's previous tracking path, highlighting where misdirection had occurred. Even at 3 years old, her intuition and observation had played an undeniable role in clarifying the sequence of events. Officer Green stepped forward to testify regarding the new findings. He detailed how Rex's indications had initially been influenced by residual scents, wind patterns, and the presence of another dog in the area, factors that led to the misidentification of the innocent neighbor. The officers acknowledged that, without the re-examination prompted by Emma's observations, these critical details might have remained unnoticed. The jury, now fully attentive, watched as diagrams and footage illustrated the corrected tracking path. It became clear where Rex had paused erroneously, and how the real culprit's movements corresponded to the revised analysis. The evidence was compelling, blending technical expertise with the clarity provided by the child's observations. The courtroom atmosphere was a mix of amazement, relief, and quiet admiration for Emma's role in uncovering the truth. The wrongly accused man was called to the stand again, this time to hear the declaration of his innocence. The judge addressed him solemnly. Based on the new evidence and the identification of the true culprit, the court finds that you are wrongfully arrested. You are free to go. Relief washed over his face, tears welling in his eyes. He turned briefly to Emma, kneeling slightly to whisper, "Thank you. I don't know how you knew, but you helped me more than anyone else." The courtroom erupted with a mixture of applause and murmurs. Spectators marveled at the extraordinary circumstances. A 3-year-old's keen observation had highlighted critical flaws in the investigation, leading to the exoneration of an innocent man and the capture of the actual perpetrator. Reporters jotted notes frantically, capturing every detail for broadcasts and publications. Headlines for the following day promised to astonish the nation. Toddler uncovers true car thief, and 3-year-old saves innocent man. Emma's parents, overwhelmed with pride and relief, embraced their daughter gently. Sarah whispered, "You were so brave today," Hallmark added. "You helped save someone's life and bring the truth to light." Emma, exhausted from the intensity of the trial, hugged her bunny tightly and yawned, oblivious to the magnitude of her actions. To her, it had been a series of observations and gestures, a game of noticing details, yet it had changed everything. Clara Benson addressed the court one final time, emphasizing the broader implications of the case. "This trial has shown us that justice is not solely about experience or training," she said. "It is also about attention, observation, and the courage to speak truth, no matter the source." In this instance, a child's simple words and gestures illuminated a reality that adults had overlooked, correcting a grave error and restoring justice. Officer Green, reflecting on the day's developments, remarked quietly to a fellow officer, "I've worked with Rex for years, and I never imagined that a child could reveal such an important flaw. It's humbling." His words echoed a broader truth. Expertise is invaluable, but sometimes insight comes from the most unexpected places. The true thief, facing the consequences of his actions, was escorted from the courtroom, now accountable for his attempted crime. The innocent man, finally cleared of suspicion, left with his family, experiencing a mixture of relief, gratitude, and awe at the bizarre yet extraordinary sequence of events that had led to his freedom. Media coverage continued late into the evening. The story of a toddler who had influenced a criminal trial captivated the nation. Social media exploded with comments praising Emma's sharp observation and innate courage. News anchors repeatedly emphasized the phrase she had spoken, the 2 words that had changed the course of the trial: "Wrong dog." In homes across Elmwood Drive and beyond, people reflected on the lesson this remarkable case offered. Truth can come from the most unexpected sources, and even the smallest voices deserve to be heard. Emma, in her innocence, had demonstrated that clarity and justice are not bound by age or experience. That night, the Thompson household was quiet. Emma slept peacefully, her bunny clutched tightly, while her parents reflected on the day's events. They marveled at her ability to observe and communicate in ways adults often failed to recognize. Her words, simple, clear, and incisive, had prompted the discovery of critical evidence, corrected a miscarriage of justice, and exposed the true culprit. The trial had reached its climax, but the story was far from over. The extraordinary impact of a 3-year-old's perception had become a symbol of hope and inspiration, a reminder that even in the most complex systems, innocence and insight can illuminate the truth. And for Elmwood Drive, life would never be quite the same again. Emma's 2 words, "Wrong dog," would echo long after the trial, a testament to the power of observation, courage, and the extraordinary capacity of the human mind. no matter how small. The courtroom was a whirlwind of emotions. The true culprit had been identified, the innocent man exonerated, and the evidence corrected all, thanks to a tiny, observant child. Emma Thompson, sitting quietly with her parents, had become the center of attention, though she seemed blissfully unaware of the extraordinary impact she had made. Her small fingers clutched her bunny as spectators, media personnel, and even seasoned officers watched in awe. Judge Morrison called the court to order one final time, her expression a mixture of stern authority and genuine admiration. "Today, we have witnessed an extraordinary sequence of events," she said. "An innocent man was nearly wrongfully convicted, and a true crime was revealed, due in part to the keen observation of a young child. This court recognizes the significance of these contributions and the importance of vigilance, regardless of age." A ripple of murmurs spread across the courtroom. Spectators, who had arrived expecting a routine trial, now understood they had witnessed something unprecedented. Even the jury members were visibly moved, leaning forward as they reflected on the extraordinary role Emma had played. It was not just the identification of flaws in the investigation that impressed them, it was the courage and clarity of a child, unfiltered by adult assumptions. The wrongly accused man, now fully exonerated, was called to address the court. Tears shimmered in his eyes as he turned toward Emma, kneeling slightly to speak at her level. "I don't even know how to thank you," he said softly. "You saved me from a mistake that could have changed my life forever. You are a hero." Emma, tilting her head, simply smiled and hugged her bunny. To her, it had been a matter of observation, a game of noticing details, but the impact of her actions was undeniable. Outside the courtroom, media coverage reached a fever pitch. Reporters clamored for interviews with Emma's parents, eager to understand how a 3-year-old had influenced a criminal trial. Cameras flashed as Sarah and Mark, still in awe themselves, explained Emma's simple yet precise observations. "She's always been observant," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "We never imagined her noticing small details could have such a profound impact. But she did. She helped ensure justice was served." Mark added, "Her words, 'wrong dog,' were the catalyst. They reminded everyone that even the smallest voices can reveal truths we might otherwise overlook. We are so proud of her, but more than that, we are humbled by her ability to see what others missed." The reporters nodded, scribbling furiously, realizing they were witnessing a story that would capture hearts nationwide. The courtroom itself began to clear, leaving behind a sense of reverence and awe. Officers who had initially relied on Rex's tracking approached the Thompson family, offering quiet congratulations. Officer Green, still somewhat stunned, knelt to Emma's level and spoke gently. "You did something amazing, little one," he said. "You helped uncover the truth when even trained adults could not." Emma looked up at him, eyes wide, and whispered a soft, "Dog. Bad," pointing once more at Rex with a shy grin. Green chuckled softly, understanding the full significance of her words. The media frenzy followed the family home that evening. News crews reported on Emma's observations and the extraordinary chain of events, broadcasting her story across the nation. Headlines like "Toddler Solves Crime," "A 3-year-old Saves Justice," and "Child Witness Uncovers Real Thief" dominated both television and online platforms. Social media exploded with praise for Emma, with many marveling at the uncanny clarity and bravery of such a young child. Neighbors in Elmwood Drive gathered outside the Thompson home, offering congratulations and expressing amazement at what had transpired. Many spoke of how Emma's actions had inspired them to pay closer attention to the small details in their own lives. Her impact extended beyond the courtroom, leaving a ripple effect throughout the community that would be remembered for years. That evening, as the chaos subsided, Sarah and Mark tucked Emma into bed. "You were incredible today," Sarah whispered, smoothing back her daughter's hair. "You helped bring the truth to light," Emma yawned, holding her bunny tightly, still processing the excitement in her own small way. Mark added, "You've shown us all that even the smallest people can make the biggest difference. Never forget that." As Emma drifted to sleep, the family reflected on the extraordinary events of the past week. What had begun as a simple observation, "wrong dog," had evolved into a story of justice, courage, and unexpected heroism. Their daughter's words had not only exonerated an innocent man, but had also captured the attention of the nation, illustrating the profound impact of innocence and perception. The next day, the courthouse held a small ceremony to formally recognize the correction of the wrongful arrest and the identification of the true culprit. Judge Morrison commended the officers for their professionalism in revisiting the evidence, the legal teams for their meticulous work, and notably, the young witness for her extraordinary contribution. "In the pursuit of justice," the judge said, "no observation is too small, no voice too young. Today, we celebrate the truth, revealed in part by a remarkable child." Emma, seated quietly with her parents, received a small certificate acknowledging her role in the case. She smiled shyly as the courtroom applauded, her tiny hands gripping her bunny. To most, it was a token of recognition. To Emma, it was simply part of a day filled with observation, gestures, and the satisfaction of seeing the right outcome achieved. And media coverage continued to grow, with interviews, features, and social media campaigns celebrating Emma as a symbol of clarity, courage, and the unexpected ways in which truth can emerge. Psychologists and child development experts highlighted her ability to perceive patterns and communicate observations effectively, calling her case a remarkable example of early cognitive skills applied in real-world problem-solving. Exonerated man expressed his gratitude publicly. "I will never forget what this little girl did," he said in an interview. "She reminded all of us that justice sometimes depends on paying attention, no matter how small or young the observer. I owe my freedom to her, and I hope people everywhere understand the importance of listening carefully." Elmwood Drive, once a quiet, unremarkable neighborhood, now carried the story of Emma Thompson far and wide. Neighbors often spoke of the child's remarkable observation skills, and local authorities revisited training procedures for canine units and investigations, acknowledging that even the most trained professionals could benefit from multiple perspectives, even those of the youngest witnesses. By the end of the week, the Thompson household returned to a semblance of normalcy. Emma continued to explore the world around her with curiosity, pointing, observing, and asking questions, just as any 3-year-old would. But for Sarah and Mark, every small gesture and word from their daughter now carried a deeper meaning. She had changed lives, corrected an injustice, and reminded everyone that truth often appears in the simplest forms. Even as the media attention gradually waned, Emma's story remained etched in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Legal professionals cited the case in discussions about the importance of observation and verification. Psychologists marveled at her perceptiveness, and communities across the nation celebrated the reminder that age and size are never barriers to insight. That night, as the Thompson family sat together, Sarah reflected, "It's incredible how something so small, a word, a gesture, can have such a huge impact." Mark nodded. "She's not just our little girl anymore. She's a symbol of truth, clarity, and the extraordinary ways in which justice can be revealed." And in her crib, Emma slept peacefully, her bunny tucked under her arm, dreaming in her own childlike way. Though unaware of the national attention, the courtroom drama, and the headlines proclaiming her heroism, her quiet observations had forever changed the lives of the innocent man, her family, and the community around her. Her 2 words, "wrong dog," had become a symbol of courage, insight, and the power of listening. The story of Emma Thompson would be told and retold, a real-life testament to how even the smallest voice can uncover great truths. And for Elmwood Drive, and indeed the entire nation, the memory of a 3-year-old who pointed, observed, and spoke the words that revealed justice would linger long after the trial ended. The following morning, Elmwood Drive felt different. The neighborhood, once quiet and routine, now carried a subtle hum of excitement. The story of Emma Thompson, the 3-year-old who had identified a flaw in a police investigation and helped exonerate an innocent man, had spread far beyond the courthouse. Television crews, reporters, and curious visitors filled the streets, all eager to witness the home of the tiny hero who had spoken just 2 words, "Wrong dog." Emma, oblivious to the magnitude of her fame, continued her morning routine. She clutched her bunny, toddled around the living room, and pointed at objects as she explored, her small voice punctuating each discovery with innocent commentary. To her parents, Sarah and Mark, every gesture carried layers of meaning, a reminder that the extraordinary often arises from the simplest actions. Exonerated man visited the Thompson home once again, offering heartfelt thanks in person. "I can't even describe what you've done for me," he said, kneeling to Emma's level. "You saved my life in a way no one else could. You reminded us all that the truth is sometimes hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice." Emma smiled shyly, hugging her bunny, unaware that she had become a national symbol of observation and courage. Meanwhile, the media coverage reached an unprecedented scale. News outlets across the country broadcasted stories highlighting Emma's role in the case. Headlines read, "Toddler unmasks real criminal," "3-year-old corrects police error," and "Innocence illuminates truth." Social media buzzed with admiration, inspiring countless discussions about perception, justice, and the power of listening. Even to the youngest among us, legal professionals began citing the case as a landmark example of the importance of thorough investigation and the recognition of unconventional insights. Police departments reviewed training procedures, acknowledging that while canine units are highly reliable, human oversight and environmental variables can influence results. The case highlighted a fundamental truth. Sometimes justice relies on a combination of expertise, careful observation, and attention to the smallest details. Judge Morrison issued a formal statement, praising the courage and clarity demonstrated by Emma. "In my years on the bench, I have witnessed many forms of testimony," she said, "but rarely have I seen a perspective so unclouded by assumption, so precise in its clarity. This child's observations remind us that truth can come from the most unexpected sources, and that justice requires openness to every voice, regardless of age." Across the country, parents, educators, and psychologists celebrated the case as an extraordinary demonstration of early cognitive skills. Emma's ability to observe, interpret, and communicate effectively at such a young age was lauded as remarkable. Experts analyzed her gestures, noting how she intuitively identified patterns, discrepancies, and the influence of external factors on Rex, the police dog. The consensus was clear. Emma had exhibited a rare combination of intelligence, focus, and courage. Back at home, life gradually returned to a more ordinary rhythm. Yet even in her everyday activities, Emma's keen observation skills were evident. She pointed out objects misplaced on shelves, noticed small changes in her surroundings, and communicated her findings with the same clarity that had once turned the courtroom upside down. Sarah and Mark marveled at the continuity of their daughter's perceptiveness, realizing that her gift went far beyond the extraordinary events of the trial. The exonerated man, now free and reunited with his family, spoke publicly about Emma's role. "Her words and actions saved me from a nightmare," he said during a press conference. "It's incredible to think that a 3-year-old could do what trained professionals initially could not." Emma reminds us that we must always be willing to see the world through fresh eyes, to question assumptions, and to listen carefully. As months passed, the case continued to resonate. Legal journals analyzed the courtroom procedures, highlighting the importance of re-examining evidence and recognizing unconventional witnesses. Community events celebrated Emma's contribution, and children across the nation were inspired by the story of a peer whose curiosity and courage had influenced the outcome of a major trial. For the Thompson family, the experience left an indelible mark. Sarah and Mark reflected daily on the power of observation, the responsibility that comes with insight, and the unpredictable ways in which small actions can create immense change. They encouraged Emma to continue exploring her world, asking questions, pointing out details, and communicating her thought skills that had proven so impactful in the most extraordinary circumstances. Emma, oblivious to the global recognition, remained simply herself, curious, observant, and playful. She continued to interact with her surroundings with the same intensity and clarity that had made her pivotal in the courtroom. Yet in every glance and gesture, Sarah and Mark saw the potential for continued insight and influence, a reminder that greatness often manifests in the most unassuming forms. The media dubbed Emma the Tiny Witness, a moniker that both amused and humbled the family. She was invited to speak at community events, participate in educational programs, and meet with child development specialists who marveled at her abilities. Yet Emma's favorite activity remained simple: exploring, pointing, and noticing. Her innocence remained intact, even as the world celebrated her extraordinary contribution. In Elwood Drive, the story became legend. Neighbors recounted the events with a mixture of awe and admiration, emphasizing the importance of paying attention to the smallest voices. Children in the community were inspired to observe their surroundings carefully, while adults were reminded to approach problems with humility, acknowledging that solutions sometimes come from the most unexpected quarters. The true thief, now held accountable for his actions, publicly acknowledged the role Emma had played in bringing him to justice. "I thought I could get away with it," he said during sentencing, "but the truth always finds a way. And in this case, it came from someone I never expected, a child." His words underscored the broader message: honesty, observation, and courage, no matter the source, can prevail. Months later, the Thompson family celebrated quietly at home. Emma, surrounded by her toys and her ever-present bunny, was still the same curious child. Yet the lessons of her extraordinary actions remained. Sarah whispered, "Never doubt the power of observation," while Mark added, "And never underestimate the smallest voice. It can reveal the largest truths." The story of Emma Thompson, the 3-year-old who pointed at a police dog and spoke just 2 words, "Wrong dog," became a symbol of justice, observation, and courage. It reminded everyone that even the smallest among us can illuminate truths that adults, experts, and professionals might overlook. It inspired families, legal professionals, educators, and communities nationwide, leaving a legacy that transcended a single courtroom. In the end, justice was served, mistakes were corrected, and a child's clarity reshaped the understanding of a complex situation. The world had witnessed something extraordinary: a tiny observer whose courage, attention to detail, and simplicity of expression had changed lives forever. And as Emma Thompson played in her yard, pointing out flowers, birds, and her neighbors' pets, she remained blissfully unaware of the profound impact her words and gestures had made. But the world would never forget her, the tiny hero who proved that observation, innocence, and courage can indeed change everything. Her 2 words, "Wrong dog," would echo far beyond the walls of the courthouse, a timeless reminder that truth often appears in the smallest voices, waiting for someone brave enough to speak it.